Hey everybody, it's your girl, Pretty Girl Tip, and this is the next episode of the Good, the Bad, and the Fucking Ugly podcast. But before I get into it, somebody wants to say hello to you guys.
Hello.
All right, let's get into this episode. It's called You Love Them More Than They Loved You. Now, I feel like after last week, we are going to be holding hands again, which is perfectly fine, but I just want to let you know I'm a germaphobe and I'll be using hand sanitizer frequently. Okay. One of the hardest truths to accept is this: sometimes you love someone deeply and they only loved you how you made them feel. You gave them loyalty, you gave them patience, you gave them understanding, and you gave them grace. And somehow along the way, you started shrinking yourself to keep a connection alive that they were never fighting for in the same way. Now, we always start with the good. Not everything is fucking ugly and fucking bad. So why is loving hard isn't the problem? Before we start talking about heartbreak, let's talk about your heart. Because loving deeply was never the problem. In a world where people play games, avoid vulnerability, and treat relationships like temporary entertainment, you showed up real. A lot of people are afraid of love, honestly. They hold back, stay emotionally unavailable, pretend not to care so they can never look foolish. But you love with attention. You answer calls at 2 a.m. when there's crust in your eyes. You checked on them when something felt off. Intuition. You remember the little details, what kind of candy they like, when they hot or inebriated. You try to create safety, consistency, and softness. You weren't trying to win somebody. You were trying to build something real. And there is nothing weak about that. Some of us grew up believing love meant effort. It meant patience. It meant grace. It meant working through hard moments instead of running from them. So when people show up with their problems, you don't immediately quit. You tried harder. You communicated more. You became more understanding, more forgiving, and even more patient because you believe love deserved effort. And honestly, that belief isn't wrong. But the problem is, effort only works when two people are building, not when one person is carrying the entire relationship alone. And let's be honest, sometimes you weren't just loving the person in front of you, you were loving their potential. The version of them they could become, the version that showed up in small moments, the version you kept catching glimpses of before they disappeared again. So you held on because every once in a while, they'll give you just enough of affection, just enough hope, and just enough consistency to make you believe the relationship was finally becoming what you needed. And that's what makes it dangerous because inconsistency can become addictive when you're emotionally invested. You started romanticizing things that shouldn't have been basic. You returned phone calls, felt meaningful. A good week felt like progress. One emotionally available conversation erased 10 disappointing ones. And because you loved hard, you kept giving the relationship chances to become what it never consistently was. Not because you were stupid, and definitely not because you were desperate, but because genuine people always believe effort can change the outcome. And maybe that's the saddest part in all of this because the purest intentions often stay the longest in situations that hurt them. You kept thinking to yourself, if I love them correctly, maybe they'll finally love me correctly too. So you overextend yourself. You gave reassurance while secretly needing reassurance too. You became understanding while silently breaking inside. You carried emotional weight they barely noticed you were lifting. And little by little, you started confusing survival with love. Because eventually, loving hard stopped feeling beautiful. It started feeling lonely. Loving deeply was never your weakness. And I'm going to hold your hand when I say this. The weakness was giving that love to people who only knew how to receive it, not to return it. You showed up with your whole heart. No games, no half love, no pretending not to care. You love like commitment still meant something in a world full of temporary people. You carried loyalty like a language they never learned how to speak. You weren't too emotional, baby. You were just genuine in a generation that mistakes detachment for power. You love with intention and not convenience. Your heart wasn't foolish for believing in consistency. You gave real love to people still deciding whether they even wanted responsibility. You kept watering relationships that only survived because of your effort. You love them in a way that made excuses for behavior you should have walked away from a long time ago. Baby, your love had depth. They just didn't have the emotional capacity to meet you there. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. I'm gonna let that sit in your spirit for a second. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. Okay? People will call you too much when they benefit from giving you less because you loved like forever still existed. Now, also, how loving hard turns into self abandonment. That's very easy to do when you love hard. I am someone who does love hard. That is my squalid leather on my chest. That is my Achilles heel. Baby loves hard. But in also doing this, I've learned more about myself while doing this podcast. So again, hopefully someone else will learn about themselves. But as someone who loves hard, I overextend myself. I used to. I don't do it no more. Past tense. I used to overextend myself. So people who love hard would drain themselves trying to keep a relationship alive. You become the planner, the peacemaker, the communicator, and the emotional support system. You gave chances you wouldn't even give yourself. You kept saying, maybe they're stressed out. Everybody is stressed out. Maybe they're healing. Maybe they just need time. Meanwhile, you over here running off of emotional exhaustion, trying to hold together something that required two people. You started carrying relationships that should have been meeting you halfway. Then, in all this, you start excusing red flags. At first, they seem small, antis, the inconsistency, the disappearing acts, the lack of accountability, the mixed signals. But because you love them, you kept translating disrespect into misunderstanding. You minimized things that hurt you because you were afraid of losing them, then confronting the truth. Love made you compassionate, but attachment made you ignore reality. You kept convincing yourself, talking to yourself in the head. Nobody's perfect, which is true. They didn't mean it. They'll change eventually. Maybe. Okay. And every excuse bought them more access to hurt you again. Then we also start romancing basic effort. When you're emotionally starving, basic effort starts to feel extraordinary. A text back suddenly feels romantic. A good conversation feels like growth. And the bare minimum starts feeling like evidence that they care deeply. You were celebrating things that shouldn't even been a standard. Consistency became rare. Communication became impressive. Emotional availability became a special occasion. And because the highs were so inconsistent, they felt more intense when they finally happened. That's how people become addicted to almost love. Then, after all of this, we start confusing inconsistency with emotional depth. Chaos is not chemistry. I'm going to hold your hand and say this: chaos is not chemistry. Hot and cold behavior is not passion. It's just not. That sends my anxiety up. Me personally. Confusion. Confusion is not intimacy. Emotional availability is not a mystery. But sometimes people who love hard mistake emotional instability for connection because the inconsistency creates emotional highs and lows. You thought the intensity meant the connection was deep, while this all means it was just unstable. It was just unstable. The waiting, the guessing, the emotional roller coaster, it kept you emotionally invested because uncertainty creates obsession. Uncertainty creates obsession. And somewhere along the way, peace started feeling unfamiliar. You got used to surviving the relationship that calm love almost started feeling boring. The problem wasn't that you loved too much. It was that you were giving soulmate energy to someone who was giving you temporary behavior. You were giving soulmate energy, hold my hand, to someone giving temporary behavior. Okay, now that's the good. Now you know we always start with good. We like good things. Now everything is bad. But now we go to the bad part of it. The imbalance you kept ignoring. Always texting first. At some point, you realize if you stop reaching out, the conversation will die. You were always the one checking in, starting conversations, keeping the connection alive. And instead of asking yourself, why am I the only one maintaining this relationship? You convinced yourself that they were just bad at communication. No, they weren't. They weren't bad at communication. I'm not even gonna hold your hand with this one. They weren't bad at communication. That's just it. You kept chasing reassurance from someone comfortable letting you wonder. The effort became one sided long before you admitted it. Also, as a problem solver, team tours, I'm always fixing arguments. I hate arguing. I hate it because I go from 0 to 100 and it takes me days to calm down. So, as someone who hates being angry, I'm always trying to fix it and get over it. But you become the relationship repair system. Even when they hurt you, you still find yourself trying to make the situation better. You apologize just to restore peace. Team tours. You soften your feelings so they wouldn't pull away. You learn how to communicate your pain gently while they are barely communicating accountability at all. You were fighting to fix problems they were comfortable repeating. And eventually, you stop expressing your full emotions because you got tired of being treated like your needs were too much. Your needs were never too much. Never. Your feelings are valid. Next, you start begging for clarity. And I hate this. And I hate that I actually wrote this because this makes me sad. Just when I wrote it, I was sad. And now having to read it and record it, I'm even sadder because no one should have to beg for clarity in any relationship, friendship, relationship, any relationship. Because nothing drains you emotionally faster than confusion. Not knowing where you stand, not knowing how they truly feel, not knowing where their actions were because they never matched their words. So you started questioning yourself to force stability out of inconsistency. You ask, "Are we okay?" That's my go-to. Are we good? We straight? Okay. And then you ask yourself, "Do you even want this? Why do you act different sometimes? And also, why does it feel like I care more?" You kept begging for clarity from someone benefiting from your confusion. And that's the sad part. People who truly want you rarely leave you emotionally guessing all the time. Next, you start carrying emotional labor. You remembered everything: their stress, their triggers, their moods, their dreams, their trauma, and their healing process. But who was carrying you? Out of all this stuff I just named, who was carrying you? You became emotionally responsible for someone who barely noticed how exhausted you were becoming. You kept pouring empathy into something while secretly hoping they'll finally pour some back into you. And little by little, the relationship became emotionally uneven. You gave support, they gave inconsistency. You gave patience, they gave excuses. You gave emotional safety, they gave you emotional uncertainty. Okay. Then, after all this, as we keep going, feeling anxious instead of feeling secure. Real love should not feel like emotional survival. You should not be fighting for your life every day emotionally. But you started overthinking everything: their tone, their response time, their distance, their inconsistency, their sudden shift in energy. You started reading into silence because silence usually meant something was wrong. As growing up in my house, something's wrong, everybody's quiet. Learning now as an adult and being introverted, most people are quiet. Okay, most people are to themselves. So now as an adult, if people are quiet now, I'm just like, oh, okay. You in your thoughts, you in your head, you want to talk to me, you can talk to me. I'm easy to talk to. I've always said that to people. You stopped feeling loved and started feeling emotionally monitored by unpredictability. Anxiety wasn't being too sensitive. It was your nervous system reacting to instability. Because deep down, your heart knew you were never fully safe there. Then also, we start to notice how they show up when it's convenient for them. They come around when they're lonely, when they need comfort, when life just disappointed them, when they wanted attention, and when they needed access to your softness again. But when you needed consistency, sadly, these motherfuckers is unavailable. Loved your presence when it benefited them. Not enough to protect your heart consistently. I'm going to hold your hand again and say that. They loved your presence when it benefited them, but not enough to protect your heart consistently. And that realization hurts because it forces you to admit you were available to someone who treated you like an option during their emotional convenience. And the ugliest part about this one sided love is this: by the time you finally admit it's hurting you, you've already become emotionally attached to surviving it. Think about it. You celebrated breadcrumbs because you were starving for consistency. You kept calling bare minimum efforts. You became understanding to the point of self abandonment. We also deal with these one sided relationships because one sided relationship doesn't always look toxic in the beginning. Not everything is a red flag in the beginning. Not everything. I digress. Sometimes it looks like this: you give more understanding, you're putting in more effort, you're carrying more emotional weight, you're consistently trying to keep shit together. And at first you tell yourself relationship go through phases, which is completely true. Everything in life go through phases. But eventually you realize the relationship only functions because you're nurturing it. Watering a connection that would have died if you ever stopped trying. And the painful part of this, they often let you. They get comfortable receiving loyalty they never fully reciprocated. So while you're fighting for a connection, they're simply just enjoying the access like free Wi Fi. Emotional, unavailable people rarely announce themselves clearly. Sometimes they say all the right things. Sometimes they even want love. But wanting love and becoming emotionally capable of maintaining it are two different things. They'll pull you close, then create distance. They'll give you affection, then disappear emotionally. They make promises, then struggle with consistency. They gave you just enough to stay attached, but never enough to feel secure. And because you kept seeing glimpses of vulnerability, you convinced yourself deeper love will eventually make them fully open up. But emotional unavailability is exhausting. It is exhausting. Hear me when I say this, because it turns love into emotional guessing. You start chasing moments instead of experience consistent connection. But while we always talk about loving someone for their potential instead of their reality, again, this is where a lot of people get trapped. You didn't fall in love with who they were. You fell in love with who they could be. The version of them that you saw in rare moments, the future you imagined together in your head, the efforts you hope they'll eventually give you consistently. So every small improvement felt massive. One good week erased months of disappointment. One vulnerable conversation restarted your hope. One loving moment made you believe transformation was finally happening. You stayed committed to the possibility of them while ignoring the reality of them. Two hands, I'm going to hold you. You stayed committed to the possibility of them while ignoring the reality of them. And potential is a dangerous motherfucker because it keeps people emotionally invested in unfinished promises. We are consistently waiting for change. You keep telling yourself, maybe they just need time. Maybe they just need healing. Maybe things will get better with them after this phase. Maybe if I love them correctly, they will finally show up. I'm telling you from experience, loving someone correctly is not the answer. Hurt people hurt people. For a different podcast, so I digressed. You waited. You waited for consistency. You waited for emotional maturity. You waited for everything to be back to you the way you give it to them. You waited for the relationship to finally feel safe. Meanwhile, you kept abandoning your own needs trying to be patient with theirs. You became loyal to a future version of someone who never consistently existed. But eventually, you realized you weren't in love with what the relationship was. You were in love with what you hoped it would be someday. You hoped, and hope is a dangerous thing too. And there's nothing more heartbreaking than realize you spent years waiting for someone to become the person they kept pretending to be. You knew it was uneven, but you kept hoping that love would eventually make them choose you correctly. All right, the part that nobody wants to talk about, the fucking ugly. Let's get into it. Of over explaining your worth. Nothing breaks your spirit faster than feeling like you have to convince someone to value you correctly. You start explaining things that should be very obvious to motherfuckers. Just being honest. How honesty mattered, how consistency mattered, why communication mattered, why being treated gently mattered. You kept trying to translate your pain into language they will finally understand. Meanwhile, the entire time, you were standing in front of someone who saw your effort and still chose inconsistent behavior anyway. There's a special kind of heartbreak in realizing you had to over explain why you deserve basic love. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to care for you correctly. And eventually, the humiliation sets in because deep down, you realize love was never supposed to feel like a presentation of your own worth. You also, in this process, start grieving someone while they're still alive. Now, to some people who have not really experienced hard grief, like a death of a parent, death of a friend, things of that nature, grief is still grief. And that is another podcast situation that is not today. But grieving someone who is still alive, this grief is very different because they're still here, still posting, still laughing, still living their life. But the version of them you love, the version you believed in, the version you kept fighting for, that version starts dying slowly in front of you. You mourn someone who never physically left, but emotionally disappeared a long fucking time ago. And that grief is confusing because there's no funeral for almost love. There's no closure ceremony. There's no official ending. There's none of that. Just silence, distance, inconsistency, and the slow realization that the connection isn't what you thought it was. So you kept revisiting memories trying to figure out, was any of this, and I mean any of this, even fucking real? You also start to realize effort doesn't force love. Efforts doesn't force love. This might be one of the hardest things in my adult life at the tender age of 27. Love cannot be earned through suffering. It just can't. You cannot love someone into emotional maturity. You cannot sacrifice enough to make someone choose you correctly. You cannot underperform for anybody. Your loyalty could not heal someone committed to inconsistency. And that realization hurts because you truly believe effort meant something. You thought, if I stay patient, if I communicate, if I keep loving them properly, eventually they'll meet me there. But some people enjoy being loved more than they actually know how to love. And no amount of effort is going to change that. You started feeling emotionally addicted to inconsistency. The highs became addictive because the lows were so painful. When they finally showed affection, it was euphoric, orgasmic. Ugh, don't you love it? Of disappointment. Tiny moments of reassurance felt emotionally overwhelmed because you've been deprived of consistency for so long. You became attached to the relief, not the relationship. That's why walking away felt impossible. Your nervous system got attached to the unpredictability. You kept chasing the next good moment, hoping it will finally become permanent. But unstable love creates emotional dependency, not emotional safety. You begin mourning the version of them you invented in your head. Yeah, I'm gonna let that sit there for a second. This is the part that nobody talks about enough. Sometimes the people we're grieving never fully existed. You fell in love with their potential, their rare vulnerable moments, their promises, the chemistry, the fantasy of who they could become. So while reality kept hurting you, your imagination kept trying to save the relationship. You stayed loyal to their potential while the reality kept breaking your heart. And eventually you realize you weren't just mourning the relationship, you were mourning the future you created in your head. The trips, the healing, the consistency, the love story you kept believing will eventually come true. The hardest part wasn't losing them. That's not it. The hardest part was finally accepting that the version of them you love only existed in pieces. We tell ourselves all the time, nobody hurts you more than the person that you love. Nothing hurts more than realizing you were loyal to someone who was never loyal to you and you were only convenient to them. You weren't hard to love. They were simply incapable of loving you properly. You kept trying to prove your worth to someone benefiting from your insecurity. And the hardest truth of all of this, people rarely misunderstand genuine love. They just get comfortable receiving it without reciprocating it. But now we start choosing ourselves after emotional starvation. Eventually, the anger stops becoming only about them because now it goes inward. You have resentment towards yourself now. You start replaying everything in your head. Why did I let this go on for so long? Why did I keep accepting this? Why did I ignore what I already knew? And why do I keep loving someone who keeps hurting me? Honestly, self betrayal hurts differently because deep down, your intuition warned you early. You kept silencing it in the name of love. The resentment came from realizing you abandoned yourself trying not to lose them. You tolerated things that broke your spirit because you were hoping the relationship would eventually reward your patience. Instead, it fucking drained you. You kept replaying moments you ignored. After the relationship starts falling apart, your memory becomes cruel. Suddenly, every red flag returns. Every moment you made excuses for, every inconsistency you minimized, and every gut feeling you talked yourself out of. You remember the unanswered text messages, the emotional distance, the broken promises, the moments they made you feel unwanted and unloved, and also the times your body felt anxious before your mind admitted the truth. Your intuition noticed the pattern long before your heart could even accept it. Now you replay conversations searching for the exact moment you should have fucking walked away. But the truth is, you didn't leave because you still believe love can fix what the reality kept exposing. Also, we finally admit relationships survive mostly because of you. You put the work in. And this realization is quite devastating, I'm not gonna lie. Because once you stop overcompensating, you start seeing how little effort was actually coming from the other side. I mean, little effort. You were there consistently. You were there to communicate. You were there as the emotional glue. You were the one keeping difficult conversations alive. You were the only one trying to heal what kept breaking. The relationship didn't survive because of mutual effort. It survived because you refused to let it die. And once you finally stopped carrying that, everything collapsed quickly. That's why the truth becomes impossible to ignore sometimes. They were comfortable with your love, but not committed to protecting you. I'm gonna hold your hand. They were comfortable with your love, but not committed to protecting you. You kept thinking the relationship was struggling when really you were the only one fucking fighting to save it. I'm gonna end on this note. They didn't love you the way you deserved, but that does not make you unlovable. It means you finally have to stop pouring oceans into people handing you teaspoons back. Two hands. Cause this is a tough line. It means you finally have to stop pouring oceans into people handing you teaspoons back. The real healing begins the moment you stop asking, why wasn't I enough? And start asking, why did I settle for so little? Okay, we did it. We finished another episode. We did it. This has been the good, the bad, and the fucking ugly, where we tell the truth people usually avoid. If this episode hit home, send it to someone still trying to heal from a one sided love story. And remember, being loved correctly changes everything. I'm going to say it again for the folks in the back. Being loved correctly changes everything. All right, y'all. One more time before we head up out of here. The red flag of the week. You consistently feel confused about where you stand with them, but you are crystal clear about how much effort you're giving. For the folks in the motherfucking back. I hope you heard that. All right, y'all. Make sure you check us out on all our socials: TikTok, X, Twitter, if you my age, Instagram, and Facebook. And I will see you guys next week. Bye.